Listening to the agreed statements of fact was a painful but a necessary process, and we're grateful for those who chose to participate in this final phase of the case. The victim impact statements were meaningful and gave the public keen insight into the impact of this case that it had on the City of Toronto. We're extremely grateful to Crown Attorney Michael Cantillon and his team, who did a fantastic job working with us and bringing us to where we are today. By no stretch of the imagination was this an easy task. It was incredibly difficult for all of us. Since the beginning, our investigators were motivated to bring justice to the victims, their families, and the community as a whole. And I would like to thank them for their efforts. But our work is not done. We will continue to support the opportunity to explore our investigative efforts in a transparent and accountable way, and we'll continue to cooperate with Justice Epstein's review and the efforts that are made there. We'll also continue to partner with the LGBTQ+ community to rebuild the trust that is essential to reporting crime and to solve crime. Like no other case, this has reinforced our responsibility as a police service to continually evolve and to get better at what we do through improved policies, procedures, training, or any other thing. We will do everything that we can to continue to strengthen our relationships with communities and figure out what we need to do to learn and grow as a police agency working with our communities. And with me today, I have Inspector Hank Idsinga, as well as Detective Dave Dickinson, who were the leaders of this investigation. I also have Constable Danielle Bottineau, who is, I will say, one of the strongest when it comes to policing and liaisoning with the LGBT community. She has an international footprint and has by far been one of my strongest assets when it comes to this discussion. I will open up the forum and platform to you to ask questions to any one of us. If you could just please come up so that if you get asked a question, you can answer. Go ahead.
Chief, could you start by sharing with us if you think the sentence, while symbolic in some ways, is satisfactory?
Well, there are two things that I have to look at. First, if it was one of my loved ones, there wouldn't be any sentence that would make me happy. But when I look at Justice McMahon, who I know is one of the most knowledgeable individuals that I know when it comes to law in Canada, you couldn't have put it through a better individual to have the outcome. And let's be honest here, I do not see Bruce McArthur seeing daylight. I do not see him in a public setting ever again. If he were to be paroled, then we'd have to start questioning our sentencing in the country. I'll take it for face value that in this case that life will mean life at the end of the day. He's eligible for parole in 25 years. That doesn't mean he's going to be free.
Chief, we know from the statement of facts that Toronto Police investigators are part of Houston interviewed Bruce McArthur in 2013. We don't know much of the details then. Can you share some of those? And can you reflect on what it means that you had a serial killer in the police station and you let him go?
Well, as understanding investigations and knowing how complex they are and the large bandwidth in which we took well before with Project Houston and the resources and time and effort and the officers and the judicial authorizations that were put forward, it wasn't until late January of last year when we had that tangible connection. Inspector Idsinga can talk in more detail with respect to that, and I certainly do not want this to be an opportunity to go through every aspect of the investigation. We are definitely going to be transparent. I feel very strong about the hard work that was done by the Toronto Police Service and all agencies that assisted us, but I do believe that the public has some questions. A lot of people are satisfied with the investigation when they sit down and listen to what happened and how it broke down with the exposure of the ITOs that took place. They understood the comprehensive investigation that took place. We did not sit flat with this at any moment. So some people are very satisfied with what has happened. Some need answers to questions, as you are asking right now, and others are not satisfied. As an organization, the ability to learn, not because we have to, because we want to, is what's most important. And the right forum for the discussion to go right down to minutia on every individual item that led up to this conclusion, I certainly am willing and looking forward to those opportunities.
Chief, you sort of partially answered it, but in December we were here and you indicated there was no evidence of a serial killer. And then you sort of partially answered it because it wasn't until January, although
That's correct.
Although Bruce McArthur was on the radar, was that an investigative decision when you said that, or did you not know at that time there was evidence against it?
Well, Joe, one of the luxuries I don't have is hindsight, and we as law enforcement have to deal with the evidence that we have at that time. When we're talking about a crime that we're talking homicide here, and we're talking multiple homicide here, and it was something that we looked at, so we were looking at it for years. At that moment when I made that statement, I was very, very specific with what I said because it was accurate and right. When I said, at this time, there is no evidence to say that we had a serial killer. And you have to look at all lanes with this. You have to look at who committed the murders. You have to look at whether it was one person who did it, whether or not there are copycats that did it, or whether or not there are a multitude of people. So to say that there was, with no evidence to suggest that at that time, would have been completely inaccurate on my part. I can tell you, the moment that we knew what we had, the moment we had evidence to tell us that, we acted immediately. And that's why we have this conclusion right now. It was clearly indicated that because of the investigation that Inspector Idsinga and Detective Dickinson, putting all those resources together and framing the case properly, it was an outstanding job done by them. So the work was done by law, using evidence for a court forum, not the forum of public opinion, Joe, and you understand that better than most in the room, for courts. At the end of the day, we are responsible to bring investigations based on evidence, not emotion, to a courtroom to be tried, to be tested, to withstand the scrutiny in order to have what we have today.
But Chief, don't you feel your words may have put the public at risk? Don't you feel that deaths could have been prevented had you warned the public sooner? Didn't you have strong enough suspicions to warn the public?
No, what I said is what I stand by, and I'll keep that. If you want to keep mixing it up, you can go ahead. We had put our investigators at the forefront, and not only investigators, I put specialized people when we started Project Houston to look at, to work with the community, to interview as many people as possible. This was not taken lightly, and it's still not taken lightly. And that's part of the reason why I'm looking forward to that opportunity to properly have that forum where those discussions can be had so that there is a clear understanding of law, a clear understanding of everything that we had. And the true test is, what did you do with the information at the time? And I can tell you from what I know and from what I've experienced in this case, things were done properly. And the messagings that were put out there were accurate in the time. We do have the luxury, we have the luxury of hindsight right now, and that's unfortunate. And the amount of homicide cases that I've done, I can tell you, if I had redo moments, almost every single case, I would have a redo moment. And that's part of the learning process. And I think what makes this particular case unique was that it was a serial killer. And, you know, it's a dark day in Canada, but a darker day in the city of Toronto when we had to investigate and apprehend a serial killer. And so there are some uniquenesses to it. And so we will do everything we can to make people more aware of law and of how we present cases before the courts and what our responsibilities and accountabilities are. And I don't have the luxury of making assumptions, especially large assumptions like that, to the public. I have to be able to be solid with what I say in the office of the chief in order to have that integrity for the investigation and as well as for the court proceedings.
Chief, a question for you and
Can I
maybe a
have-
question for your team. But was there any sort of deal made with Mr. McArthur before his guilty plea was entered in the court? Were there any kinds of conditions placed on it? Were there any agreements made? Can you give us a little bit more information about the circumstances that led to this?
No, I will just comment to say that Bruce McArthur pled guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder. It's the most serious offense in the criminal code. So no, he pled guilty. That was his choice.
Detective Dickinson, did you ask for
Concessions about where he would be incarcerated?
No,
Is he going to stay in Ontario? Where would he be?
I don't know. At the end of the day, he goes into Corrections Canada, and it's up to them to place him for safety of himself, but also safety of the general public.
If there'd been a trial, we would have heard from you as a witness. Can you just tell us, the day that you guys entered that apartment, can you give us some look at what his reaction was when police arrived at his door?
I don't think this is the forum to talk about that. I will discuss that at some point down the road, but I don't think this is it. You know, we made a decision based on the evidence we had at that time, yes, it was the right decision, but I want you to understand that throughout the entire investigation, we had steps in place to mitigate any risk to the public. Even when Bruce McArthur was first on our radar, just as a name, we put people and resources in place to mitigate any risk. And at any point, when he was elevated to a person of interest, to a suspect, the people and the resources changed to mitigate any risk to the public. And at the end of the day, the people did what they had to do on January 18th, and we arrested them.
The judge mentioned that you and your teams, these were his words, you saved the life of the man known as John, and that because of the work that you and your team brought Bruce McArthur to justice. So he gave you quite a compliment. Just your reaction to that, and also, no one has spoken to John. Nobody, we know that John is not his real name. Can you tell us a bit about how he's doing?
No, I don't want to talk about John for his privacy. Throughout this investigation, there are obviously the people that want to be in the spotlight. They want to tell their side of the story, but behind the scenes, there are dozens who don't want to, and John is one of them. And I'm not going to discuss any further about John. What His Honor said, of course, about myself and my team, very appreciative of, but I've said this before, I don't want to make this about us. We acted, we did what we were trained to do, and it worked out. But yes, no, I appreciate his comments, but you have to also understand that there were dozens, hundreds of officers working behind the scenes that assisted that day.
What you just said that you didn't have the evidence to kind of go when you did McArthur in 2013, potentially when you made McArthur pass at other times. But we learned from the statement of facts that his criminal record was still, not as sponge as when he interviewed in 2013. We know people from the community, friends of the victims, who were saying Bruce McArthur was seen as my friend before they existed. Did it matter that the evidence wasn't there, or did you not treat these cases as though they were suspicious, or what else needed to happen?
Justin, the evidence was there on January 17th of 2017, or sorry, 2018. That was the date the evidence was there, and we acted and arrested him the very next day.
Detective, you were one of the few who actually sat in a room with him and interviewed him. Did he ever say to you, did he ever give you any indication of why he did what he did?
The conversations that I've had with Bruce McArthur, I want to keep private right now. I will continue to strive to bring answers and closure to some of the questions that people have, but right now I want to keep any conversations that I've had with Bruce McArthur private.
The judge mentioned that while McArthur took responsibility for his crime, but pleaded guilty, he does not think he's remorseful. Do you share those sentiments?
Again, something I don't want to comment on right now. I will agree. I don't think he's remorseful, but I'm not saying that going forward, there may be some assistance that can help. Not something I'm going to comment right now.
And did you ever consider making charges in the case of the man that you found Dave McArthur was arrested? Because we heard in court that he was being held against his will, and that the judge just clearly expects that he would have been his next victim. So did you consider any charges in that case as well?
No, we did not, and I'm not going to get into that any further.
This question is for both you and Detective Idsinga. After all the work that you've put into this, and the things that you've seen and experienced, this sentence can't be satisfactory. I understand that Mr. McArthur is going to be 91 when the 25 years are up, and he'll probably never see the light of day again. But the sentence can't be satisfactory. He's one of the worst serial killers in this country.
It's still a life sentence. The only difference is the parole eligibility, and as Justice McMahon said, he can't imagine a parole board ever letting Mr. McArthur out, even if by some fluke he lives to the age of 91. We don't expect to see Mr. McArthur in public again. We're satisfied with the sentence.
You are satisfied
Yes,
after all the work that you and everyone has put into it?
Absolutely.
You've done it in cold cases. We know you're sort of reviewing 25 cold cases going back to 75. Can you give an update on that?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever given a specific number on it. There are quite a few cold cases. We are still not quite done reviewing those, but we're getting close to the end. And as I've said before, so far we have absolutely no evidence to link Mr. McArthur to any of those cases.
We read in the statement of facts that police only found some of the victims based on the photos that you discovered on his hard drives. So in those cases, you found the victim, he was charged, he's been punished for those crimes. Can you say with any degree of certainty you believe there are no other victims at no other point in his life?
At this point in time, like I said, we're still looking at cold cases. As far as we know, based on the evidence that we have, the first individual that he killed was Scannon Navaratnam in 2010.
Hank, can you please speak to what it was like for you and your memory of previous investigations as well? What it was like for both of you to be in the courtroom this week?
Well, for myself and my team, I can say it was closure for us. This isn't the first and only murder case that I've had before the courts, and the courts, it's a long process, and to have this concluded, this is a quick conclusion. You know, we're in the courts for years sometimes with a basic murder case, so to have one where someone's charged with 8 murders conclude within 13 months of the arrest, it's fulfilling. It's nice that it is done. This investigation is far from done, so it's not done in that aspect, but it is nice to have the court process done.
What do you mean it's not done? What else? What do you mean?
Like I've mentioned before, we will continue to look at any connection that Bruce McArthur has to anybody, missing persons, we've looked at cold cases. We will continue to look to see if there are any other links that we have not seen to date. But again, there is no evidence to date to suggest there's any more murders that he's responsible for.
Where do you reports you that you're the one who wrote the case and matched the name to vehicle registries? Can you speak about that investigative moment when you all as a team felt that you finally get a...
And you said it was as a team. It was me who did the search, but yes, it was an entire team effort, and many of them are here today. So, a big piece of that evidence was a note left by Andrew Kinsman himself. In hindsight, he left the name of his killer on his calendar, and the investigation doesn't flow as fluidly as what's described in the agreed statement of facts. But eventually, we tied Bruce to Bruce McArthur. And yes, a lot of that was thanks to Andrew Kinsman and his calendar.
Does all the information in this statement of facts come from you and your investigators, or did any of the information come from Bruce McArthur?
I can't comment on that right now. I believe the agreed statement of facts was the investigation itself.
So he didn't give you any information that has been made public in that sense?
I've commented before. I said earlier, I'm not going to comment right now on the conversations that I've had with Bruce McArthur.
Just a chance to look at disciplinary charges against Sergeant Gauthier. If he was so negligent in his investigation, that was back in 2016, and if that's the opinion of upper management and yourself, he was negligent in his investigation, why did it take so long to bring disciplinary charges against him when his interview with McArthur took place back in 2016?
Yeah, well, there are a couple of things to that. First and foremost, there is nothing that I've said that has put anyone in guilt for anything that is done. Understanding a tribunal, and I think a lot of people are a bit confused with that. First off, it's not a trial. It's an employee-employer situation, and as law enforcement, we have tribunals. But when it comes to investigations, we ask, what did you do with the information you had at the time? Now, it seems pretty simple, but that is the fundamental process of what the tribunal is. What did you do with the information that you had at the time? And then the second piece is, if you're in certain specialized moments or units, there are accreditations. In some instances, the accreditations most of them are provincial, but when it comes to audits and accountabilities for procedures, would say you need to do certain things. Some of them are provincially audited, and some are also audited by us. So those are all of the factors that are involved, and because we have to withstand the scrutiny of courtroom decorum, things are audited. So what you did would be in your memo books. What you did would be on your any reports you submitted would be time-stamped with what information you put in there. So it's an opportunity for the officer to explain what he or she did. That's the purpose of a tribunal. So I've never, ever said that there is an assumption of guilt. It provides the opportunity for the transparency in a forum where you'll be scrutinized to certain questions to say, what did you do, and what were your responsibilities? That's it.
You mentioned in your earlier remarks about hindsight for yourself, and now I think you've softened it up for Sergeant Gauthier to explain that was a procedural thing that he was facing. This is an out-of-the-box situation where everything is magnified times 10. And I think that from his letter, he feels that these extra 2 murders that happened post his interview, he's being blamed for it. I think that although he has to have this procedural tribunal, he could help perhaps him and the whole country understand what the position of your position in the police on him? Is he responsible for that, or is this a procedural thing that should have looked at more prior?
Well, I certainly did not magnify it, Joe. I mean, I'm responding to a newspaper article based on a letter written, whether it was or was not. So the question was asked. When it comes to tribunal issues, I try to stay arm's length because that's important. And you know, me having a strong arm in it is very hard because I spoke about the audit mechanism, and we have case laws based on all of this. So it's simply a matter of what did you do? When did you do it? Where did you write it? Where did you record it? And the accountability piece. So bring it. Absolutely, every officer will get a fair hearing. It's under the Police Services Act, Joe. And if there are issues with the tribunals, there are opportunities and forums to articulate those particular points.
Chief, did he help? Just one more thing on that. Did his information help with this conclusion?
Well, Joe, you get right back to the first point where I'm saying I'm trying to create an environment so that he has a fair process in the tribunal, and he will have the opportunity, subjective or objectively, to bring those points out in that proper form. I don't think at a new scrum that is the place for it, and he'll have those avenues.
Chief, we're going to learn more about that interview thanks to the tribunal, but to this point, there's no review of the two police investigations that looked into this person. Of course, the person's case is not to the homicide. Is there a benefit to a public inquiry? And if it does go forward, what do you think could be learned, and what role could the Toronto Police play in maybe, getting an inquiry?
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm working with the board on this. The board has been watching and has been asking questions. They too want to understand the transparency and the obligation to make sure that as an organization we're doing everything to maintain fairness and accountability for everything that we do. And so I'll be working with the board. I know that they have proactively taken steps on this. It's not because this has happened now they're doing things. They've taken proactive steps to ensure that that accountability piece is there. And whatever form it will take place in, I will be glad to bring in our team, our investigators, our evidence, what we knew, when we knew, what we did, and why we did what we did. So I'm very cognizant, and if we're going to get this right, because first off, there's loss of life, and I don't want to diminish that. I think that is crucially important. As an organization, we want to do everything we can to reduce those opportunities or moments to ever happen. But secondly, we have to build relationships. We don't solve crimes without relationships with communities, all communities right across the city. And the LGBTQ plus community plays a very strong role in the relationship piece, with crime solving, with all of those things. And so that is a continuous work that will go and continue regardless of whatever format we have that public ability or platform to articulate what we did. So collectively, we all want to get it right, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If we can learn from this, then we will capitalize on that because I think it's important. But I also want to keep things in context. It is very rare that we have serial killers. It is very rare. And there are a lot of newness for us as police, a lot of newness for you as media, because you're all here today. Normally when I've got good news stories, I see one or two, but I got a room full plus right now that are here. And it's not to be salacious, because you genuinely want to know what's going on and what can be done in the future. So I'm grateful for that, but let's take it in context. This is not a normal day-to-day situation. The pressures that were involved for the investigation and a massive team that brought us here is a tremendous result of hard work and dedication working with the community, but there are things that we can do to improve upon, and I'm looking forward to those moments.
What are the proactive steps that you
Go ahead. Wendy, you haven't asked the question.
I just want some clarity on whether you support both the public inquiry and the ongoing FC review. There are certain limitations to the missing persons review that the public inquiry could actually solve. So can you say right now, do you support a public inquiry?
I'm sure you all are going to figure out what storyline you're going to prove to move towards of what you want to have happen. But I can tell you, I am working, Joe, I thought I gave you one, right? But I'll reiterate it again. We will be working with the board to figure out what the best solutions are, and we are proactive about it. We are not hesitating. I've said over and over again, we want to be transparent. We want to get this right, Wendy. And I've not diminished my language is very strong on that, and it still is.
Do you continue to be asked by members of the public why Bruce McArthur's milk shot was never released? I know there's been a bit of clarity on it, but perhaps not enough for members of the public because they continue to ask.
Sure.
And at your year-end, you said you look into it. So what is the answer for members of the public who are thinking they see this image of this man, outside Niagara Falls?
Yeah, I'll have an expert answer the question.
And will you release it now? Is there, perhaps there's no real purpose.
We have no plan, sorry, we have no plans to release it. I explained last year why we weren't releasing it. We would normally release it if it had created any investigative gain for us, and it absolutely does not. We discussed it with the Crown attorneys as far as including it in the agreed statement of facts, and it was decided not to. So we have no plans to release it at this point in time.
Idsinga, today we heard in court that the judge there were many benefits to a consecutive sentence, that he in the end went with the concurrence. What do you think about his reasons for not handing it down a consecutive sentence?
Well, as the chief said, you're listening to one of the best judges in the country, and I think he addressed every area of his concerns and made the right decision at the end of it. So he was very articulate with how he expressed his decision, and like I said, we have no regrets about his decision.
The whole hearing still hangs over the heads of these families that, should he live to be 91, they are facing that prospect of a parole hearing.
The odds of that ever happening are between slim and nil, I'd suggest. So I don't think any of the families are too concerned about facing a parole hearing in 25 years.
For us, what your continued
That is from sort of the South Asian Middle Eastern community. And they were questioning, based on the agreed statement of facts, that there was clues after Andrew Kingsman's disappearance that led to Bruce. And Bud Bruce was also linked to a lot of these men. There are questions for whether surveillance capabilities that were used for them was the investigation, to your knowledge, the most sort of followed through on that.
Absolutely, and the chief addressed it already as well when the search warrants for Project Houston were released. A lot of the criticisms and the questions that I had heard in early 2018 about the police not doing anything in 2010, 2012, 2013 were completely silenced when they saw the volume of work that went into those missing persons occurrences. And let's not forget that the surveillance video that Detective Dickinson relied on was obtained by officers from 51 Division responding to a missing persons report and having the wherewithal to canvas for that video and obtain that video just in case some foul play came into play.
Very soon after the other men's disappearance as well.
Most of them were between 10 days to 15 days before they were reported missing. Basir Faizi, I believe, was the only one who was reported within 48 hours. To Peel Police, and Peel Police conducted that investigation in 2010, 2011. But like I said, a lot of the criticisms that I heard are from people who don't realize what really is going on behind the scenes. And I believe Detective Radford is here in the back, and 51 Division, the officers and the investigators from there responding to Kinsman. Like I said, it was reported within 48 hours, his disappearance, and thankfully that video was still there and hadn't been overwritten. If he had been reported 10, 15 days later, we probably wouldn't be here today because that video would have been gone.
Inspector, can we also get your comments on Sergeant Gautier's comments? He says he's being made the fall guy, he's being used as a scapegoat for some of the errors made in this investigation.
Right.
So what are your comments on that?
I'm not gonna comment on it. If that's his position, I haven't seen this letter that everyone's talking about. It wasn't sent to me, and it's before the tribunal right now. And I've explained, and I've explained in the past what my role was in that, leading to a tribunal. So we'll leave it for the tribunal.
Do you think by just moving forward, what are the next steps? And this may be a question for either of you. Are there going to be further conversations with Mr. McArthur? If so, what is the nature of those conversations, and what will the intent be? And from that perspective of just dealing with him as an individual, what is the plan?
And I think Detective Dickinson has already answered that question.
Can we get a couple of comments on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious because, through this whole investigation, through the murder trial, there has been frustration, there's been fear in the community, and the reaction, of course, Chief Saunders' comments that the community didn't do enough to bring it forward, again, sparked a lot of frustration and anger in the community. You're the liaison. I mean, what have you done to allay those concerns or to build those bridges that you talked about?
I think it's important to note that I haven't been the only one doing the work that's out there to build those bridges back. The conversations have continued. We've acknowledged what the community is going through, and they are hurting and they are grieving. And hopefully this is the first stepping stone to move forward, not only by themselves, but with us. Our priority has been the community going through this entire process, and we're going to continue to have them as the priority, but it's going to take time, right? And we're just going to continue to have those conversations and build bridges.
Has there been anything concrete? There's still the back and forth over pride and uniformed officers. Can you point at anything concrete to say, this step we've taken to build those bridges back?
Yeah, we've been doing community consultations with organizations that invited us into their space. Myself and Deputy McLean has been going in there, and it's not about us talking, it's about actually listening to the voices and their needs and their concerns. And we haven't, highly published that, but the work has been done. We also have the neighborhood officers in 51 that has been put into the village, and they're doing some great work down there and having conversations with the community. So there's a few concrete things that have taken place, but there's still a lot more to do.
The day of the arrest, I think that would be for Dickinson. How long was the time that passed between when Bruce McArthur and this man John went inside that building and when your officer came in?
I'd say approximately 10 or 15 minutes. Enough time for us to put everything in place to do that.
Was there any records in any of the other missing men's cell phones, computers, apps that should have pointed to McArthur here? I think specifically it's in that sense, I believe in contact with Mr. McArthur, but of course you did not lead it to the serial killer.
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that right now, Justin. I mean, there was evidence that we have uncovered to link some men to Bruce McArthur, not just Salim Esson and Andrew Kinsman. Again, you have some evidence, but it's not enough to arrest. We did not have the evidence to arrest Bruce McArthur until January 18th.
Of course, you had the evidence to arrest him, but you had the evidence to surveil him for months and months and months in advance of that.
Correct.
I guess walk me through a little bit more of why wasn't there the evidence there to even take the next step and move McArthur from that column of, material witness to potential suspect?
Well, I did. I got involved in this investigation on August 14th, and from that time on, when we built Bruce McArthur, I'm not going to say Mr. McArthur, we built Bruce McArthur and obtained that evidence throughout to ultimately move him from just a name to a person of interest to a suspect and ultimately to accused, now a convicted murderer.
If that was the case, then I have to go back to the very first question that was put to the chief. If Bruce McArthur was under surveillance for several months, became a person of interest, and it escalated, why on December 18th, I think it was, did the chief make that remark, that comment about there not being a serial, evidence of a serial?
Well, as the primary investigator, I support the chief and support what he said was accurate at that time.
So you didn't have the digital evidence back?
We did not have the evidence at that time to arrest Bruce McArthur for anything at that time.
You had your suspicions.
I want to answer Rosie. Yeah, Rosie, and that is a good question because there is confusion. At that point in time, it was not for a multitude of homicides, it was for one. We had evidence for a homicide, Mr. Kinsman at the time, and that was the status change because we had some tangible stuff only on that, not on everything else. As the investigation continued to evolve and accelerate at an incredibly fast pace in a short period of time, it exploded into the multiple victims. So when I made that comment, we had a person that we're interested in, wasn't even suspect at that point in time, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that, but it was either a person of interest or suspect for a homicide, not for the serial component.
You made a decision for your predecessor, but was it a mistake to end prosecution when you did? If you had left, it was still an investigation into three missing persons case. It was pretty serious. Was it a mistake to end it after, only about a year?
And listen, I do understand your frustration, and again, having that luxury of hindsight, I can't tell you how it's great to have. In real time, I can tell you when we put investigations in play, especially large-scale investigations, which we did long before, you follow the evidence to the best of your extent, and then you try to extract evidence to the best of your extent, and you keep doing it and doing it, and then when you reach those wall moments where whether it's coming in or not coming in, or whether there's absolutely nothing else to extract, you kind of have to take a step back. And that's exactly what the case was, which is when you look at how we led into the second piece of the investigation. So we had a team of officers, investigators, highly trained from 51 Division, working with homicide for the Houston investigation. So they have consumed a tremendous amount of knowledge for that investigation of what was going on in the village at that time. And I also want to delineate, this was not a case of the police didn't think anything was going on. We knew something stunk. There was no ifs, ands, or buts, which is why we put millions of dollars into it. We knew something stunk, and we did everything we could to find it, and we just didn't. But when it reactivated, when we had that fresh nerve into play, we were able to pull out members that were specialized, Detective Dickinson, that had the historical knowledge, plug him in with other resources to continue. So it wasn't this ad hoc thing. It was very methodical. The mindset was there. We had huge concerns. We resourced to the best of our ability at the time. And I have to be fair, and we have to strike that balance for when we stop investigations. We don't just go, boom, this is it, and we stop whether we have anything or not. If we have it, we go and we continue. And that is exactly what we did. And if you follow the ITOs that were released, and if you follow the agreed statement of facts, you can kind of put the framework together really well if you choose to, or if you don't, and that's fine. It's your call. But there's still more that the public needs to know and needs to understand. And I'm here to say that's not a concern to us. We want to do that. We want to take that overt step to figure out what platform that will happen in, working with the board, so that we can get to the minutia, which is the stuff that you and also the community wants to know. And we want to do it in a proper format in the best way possible.
Now that you have a dedicated person unit, does that change how those sort of investigations work? You know, previously it was a special project, and it was homicide investigators or from the division looking at these cases. Now that there's a dedicated team, is that going to change the formula for how you deal with this?
I think that it will. I really do think that it will enhance accountability things, that less things will slip through, and we're always continuing to figure out what we need to get better at what we do. And so once a gap is identified, and the missing persons unit is just an exact example of that, okay, what were the gaps and what's the best methodology to move forward, and then we learn from it, we go back, we evaluate, and if there's more that we need to enhance, then we will. So it's always evergreen, and we are listening and we're working with to figure out what the best practice needs to be for Toronto. It's not a one-size-fits-all.
A question for Hank and Chief chiming in too. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Andrew Kinsman and his role in this, with bringing Bruce down, also the whole everything. He knew McArthur for a period of time, and I'd like to know if there's been any consideration past or going forward that perhaps, because he did not fit a profile, that he had smelled something rotten as well in this, and perhaps that was part of what happened with him. Do you think that perhaps he was a victim because he thought something was up with McArthur?
Sorry, I don't quite understand your question.
Okay. He knew McArthur for a long time, so by murdering Andrew Kinsman, this case sort of turned a different direction for him. It wasn't the usual profile people were didn't know, and everyone did Andrew Kinsman. So the question is that there are some people that have said that Andrew Kinsman was suspicious of something. Is there any evidence to show that perhaps he was victimized? I'm not saying he wasn't involved in a relationship, but that he said something. Obviously, from your lack of understanding of the question, that it must be wrong, but I just want to know.
Well, I think the Crown said it in their agreed statement of facts that Mr. McArthur made a mistake when he killed Andrew Kinsman. Andrew Kinsman was not quite in the same profile as a lot of the other victims, and it definitely left a trail, and it was a mistake on Mr. McArthur's part.
So why did he kill Andrew Kinsman? Anything beyond what we know?
That's no.
I have
No.
a question about the agreed statement of facts. There's a gap in them, without getting too graphic, but there's a gap and some information missing in the agreed statement of facts, and I'm just curious what we're supposed to infer from that. If Bruce McArthur didn't agree to something, it doesn't really lay out the dismemberment. And we're not sure if there was a separate site for that, or if it happened in his apartment, or anything like that. There was only a mention, and it was just quickly mentioned about a saw in his van that was found.
The agreed statement of facts, much like a lot of issues in this case, is based on evidence. And we don't have the evidence to say where he committed the dismemberments, whether the dismemberments were committed in the same place or in multiple places. So that's why that's not in there.
So does that mean he didn't share that information with you if you asked him?
Again, we're not going to talk too much about the conversations we've had with Mr. McArthur or any future conversations.
The statement of facts is quite light when it comes to the past.
You're not talking about the conversation that you're planning to have with Mr. McArthur, but can you speak to the fact that part of that conversation might be to help the families kind of close this, these awful chapters of their lives? Because many of them, right up until now, say they still don't understand why the family members make contact, how they make contact, where they're at. So I know you can't get into the details, but is part of that motivation to speak to him to get fill in the blanks, not just in the previous statement of facts, but also for these families understand?
Well, again, I'm not going to answer the question about whether there will be future conversations or not, but the volume of the disclosure and the evidence gained from Project Houston, Project Prism that the Crown relied upon is what they put into that agreed statement of facts. So if there's something relevant in there that they could establish strongly enough to introduce into a court of law, it would be in there. And if it's not in there, that's why it's not in there.
Last question, please.
The search of his apartment was very extensive. That's been covered. So in your team's professional opinion, did it look like the dismemberments happened there? Because it's very difficult to get a body out. I'm sure for him to lift Andrew Kinsman, any of the bodies, it would have been extremely difficult. So we're just trying to get a sense, did it look like that happened in his apartment?
You're right. It would have been very difficult, and I think that's a reasonable conclusion that any of us can draw. But again, we do not know where the dismemberments took place.
The statement of facts is quite light when it comes to the past or I see the second victim. Can you talk about that a little bit? There really much detail about his last moments or kind of what we suspect happened to him later than any other. Can you speak a bit to that? Was there a frustration to figuring these together his last moments, or was it things that didn't enter into the court record?
Again, my answer is the same. The statement of facts is based on evidence and what we can prove in court, what the Crown can establish. And if you guys want a more fulsome agreed statement of facts, then I don't know what the mechanism is to get that.
Well, I mean, evidently,
Okay.
when you